Okay, so it's our last stop of the tour of the world in about 1750, and our final trip is to Oceania and the Pacific Islands. Now, start with the obvious. The Pacific Ocean is massive, and most of the land in this region is small islands, very far spread out. There are, of course, some exceptions. Australia and New Zealand, for example, are both quite large and today at least quite populous. So let's start taking a tour around. About 40,000 years ago, based on the most recent scientific evidence, people began to leave mainland Asia, so China mostly, in very large canoes, and they settled in places like the Philippines, um, Borneo, Indonesia, which isn't really on this map. Okay. And they settled there. Okay. In the Philippines and in Borneo, Indonesia, and to an extent, New Guinea, large and complex farming societies developed. Okay, there was in this area regular contact still with mainland Asia, and societies stay connected and are similar, not identical, but similar. Some people will leave New Guinea and they will start settling Australia. Okay, these people will eventually become what we generally refer to as the Aborigines, Indigenous Australians. The environment in Australia, which is even without climate change, very dry, did not allow for large scale farming. So most of the societies you see across Australia were hunter gatherers. Okay. But improved sailing technology enables people to again leave places like the Philippines, Borneo, Indonesia, mainland Asia to a lesser extent, and spread further out. And these people basically break down into what develop into three separate groups. Okay. We have the Melanesian societies, settling places like what today we would call the Solomon Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu, okay, New Caledonia, okay, Melanesians. We have the Micronesians, settling places like the Mariana Islands, the Marshall Islands, which are too small and not on this map, Palau, which I just enjoy saying. And lastly, we have the group that spreads out across the furthest area, the Polynesians, who settle everywhere from Hawaii, which is fairly close to dead center in the Pacific Ocean, down through Samoa and Tonga and Tahiti and Easter Island. Okay. And by 1750, there are societies of varying size and complexity across the Pacific world and Oceania, which usually we say Oceania is Australia, New Guinea, New Zealand. Okay. For the most part, these societies are small, relatively contained. There are a few exceptions. New Zealand and Hawaii both develop into much larger and in many ways much more complicated societies. Unfortunately, like in Africa and the Americas and India and other parts of the world, the arrival of the Europeans is going to cause problems. Okay. While there was interaction among the islands, and some of, particularly in Micronesia, there was still contact with mainland Asia. There was not until the very first contact with Europeans would have come in the early 1500s, but there was not real contact with the outside world or with the broader world until the arrival of the Europeans in the 16 and 1700s. And like we saw in most other places, this did not go well for the indigenous populations. All right, you see islands wiped out by disease and warfare. And just in general, we see the upheaval and often destruction of the indigenous cultures, which is, I think, by this point, you've realized a side effect of the arrival of the Europeans. Okay. I just want to point out one other thing because I think they're cool. Maybe you've seen these before, called Easter Island heads. They are actually called moai, and they are made, they are the remnants of a once much larger society on the island of Rapa Nui, which the Europeans called Easter Island because they found it on Easter. The story of the Rapa Nui people is, like many, quite tragic. The island, Easter Island, now belongs to the country of Chile. And for decades, actually, the indigenous Rapa Nui people weren't even allowed to live on the island. Slowly, some changes have been made, but due to contact with the outside world, there are not a ton of Rapa Nui people left. And the statues are still somewhat of a mystery, but more modern archaeological techniques are starting to give us some better clues as to what the heads meant, and also how the heads were built, because they are massive. Okay. Remember that this video just accompanies the reading. It does not replace the reading.